what is the correlation between HX, EX, and CX? I think talking to you, Neil, it feels like everything should be HX, right? But it's not just making new terms all the time, right? But how do we correlate all
I don't
together?
think these are. Yeah, I don't think. So I mean, there's terms and there's disciplines and there's framework. This isn't about HX. Everything is HX or replacing EX and CX. In an organizational context, like in a corporate context, customer experience is fairly well defined, even though there's still so much debate about it.
Right.
It's all the experiences you have with a company. It's the totality of your impression of that company. I know there's lots of fierce debate over where customer service lives there, and perhaps it has a massive influence in that. Others feel less so, but it doesn't really matter, because whether CS is the largest piece of the pie or not, customer experience is still all your interactions and your overall impression. Employee experience is similar. It's all your interactions and your impression of the company. It's not different. HX is not like those two. HX is if anything is a design thinking, right? So when you are thinking about EX and CX, it's you bringing in that human experience into the design, and getting to that deep level. Not just like I said, I have a ping pong table. My employees are happy. I gave a refund. That customer's happy. But, understanding what drives us and incorporating it into design, understanding what gives us fulfillment, understanding what makes us feel connected. If a customer feels connected to you,
Right.
then their loyalty is long standing. In fact, there's lots of great data on the power of service recovery. If you take a detractor in your NPS and you have an incredible service recovery moment, they become more fervent promoters than the ones who never had service recovery moment. So when you can bring in EX into HX into your thinking, deeply thinking, like again, I'm an employee. Am I heard? Am I respected? Am I understood? Am I valued? Am I included? Do I have control? Do I know my part? These questions, if you can't answer them, if you say, here's our process for training, but you haven't answered those questions in why and how you train, here's our scorecard, but you haven't answered those questions, then you're not reaching your own full potential. You may instinctively, I'm not saying that companies don't instinctively do good things, because we are all human, we can relate. But to get to that level where you're really looking at it and making it mindfully part of your design at all the stages, it's just transformative. It's a huge difference. So that to me is where these three things live and play together.
Okay, that's a good answer. How about you, NK? What do you think of this?
I think what Neil has said is pretty good. It's going a little deeper. So I think just to answer your first question, you said that are we coining a new word called HX, right? So I would say that uh, as a human, like Neil said, that we are born as a human, so we are not like coining anything new, right? So we are born human, right? So and that experience word is also right there. But I would say that the getting the priority, the now these days the businesses are giving the focus and the priority to these things. Initially they were just focused on revenue, how to sell, like creating factories, right? Now this is the era where the experience is the currency. So that is why there is a focus on human experience, customer experience, and employee experience, where the customer experience and employee experience is still at the surface that drives the organization. But I would say that the human experience is actually elevating your customer experience and employee experience, if you look at that way. And for me, if you ask me that as a human, I'm always on, right?
Right.
So if you go to the human level and ask for anything, I'm saying anything. So if you ask for as a human for any support, any required, any kind of help on the street or in the organization as a colleague or as a customer, when you speak and create your relationship, when you talk as a human, you get much more better what you need actually, right?
Mm.
But if you see as a customer, if you demand for something, probably you might not get that. Or if, as a brand, if you want from the customer something that, hey, we want the feedback, probably they might give you and may not give you. It's on their choice. But if you go to that human level, right, then they're more than happy to give you the feedback.
Right.
So
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that human experience is actually not a new word, nothing new. But when we take a human experience and imbibe that into the customer experience processes and employee experience processes, then it is actually going to give you a result that you would not have thought about it. So not just do a CX framework, EX framework, but let's see that how that is giving a better life or better uh, emotion, or better actually the result for somebody to whom we are talking to. Is my framework is actually giving just a benefit to us, or I'm sorry, to organization, or is it like inside out approach, how they are receiving it, right? And if we have this in the picture, probably like I would say that human experience will be on the top of the first priority that people need to think about before they do their CX framework or employee experience framework.
Yeah.
Tanuj.
And like
Neil, what
Neil,
do you
you
think
you
about
work
it?
on human experience, right? And you empower that. Would do you create a framework for HX? Like
Mhm.
I got a question from NK Stock that do you create a framework for HX like you do for CX and EX?
Yeah, I mean, you can. There's so many companies at different places. You know, from this perspective. So there, like I mentioned, some companies that are like leading and emerging and have this sort of concept. They're purpose driven, rooted in human experience, and they infiltrates the organization. Um, there's lots of ways to bring it in, depending on where you are in that journey. There's nothing wrong with, and I have done work with people on having a human experience framework.
Okay.
I would say that human experience, it's not so much about having that framework. Again, it's for some companies, it's the perfect way to introduce it. But for a lot of companies, it's just more about how do you bring human experience design into your CX and EX framework and your CX and EX journeys. So it's almost about a training, so to speak, of a reminder of these sort of basic human needs, and going through the process of challenging your existing processes against these needs and how they're being met. It's that exercise of talking about those emotions that we do and don't want to create, and how our journeys are actually doing that. So it should be embedded. If you're having a CX framework or an EX framework, HX is
Right.
embedded in it. But again, some companies are so forward thinking, they just have an HX framework.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even have a CX or EX framework, and they use that HX framework when doing their journey mapping for both those areas. But here's the
Okay.
other thing I'd say. This is so fascinating. I love this conversation. I know we talked earlier on about making the world a better place, and happens to be profitable. How cool is that?
Right.
But the thing about human experience is, you don't need, like, if someone's sitting around, maybe they're listening to this podcast, they're like, okay, this is wonderful theory, but my company's not going to go tomorrow and create a purpose statement. It's not happening. They want to sell the widgets. They want to get the best commissions. So here's what I'd say to anybody. I think by this time we've been talking so long that maybe no one's listening, but here's what I would say to anyone who's made it this far into the podcast. Every single person has the capability to bring HX into their organization. And I'll tell you why. At the end of the day, living human experience, like, consideration for the human experience, even at the middle levels of the hierarchy. So how do we make someone feel connected, respected, heard? How do we make them feel accomplished, recognized? How do we make them feel involved, valued? These are things that all of us can do any given day in our organization. We can treat our peers that way, our employees, our boss, our customers. Yeah. And the reality and the coolest thing about this is, this is where I love to nerd out on the science and the academic side, is there's actually something called emotional contagion. When we behave a certain way, I'm kind to you. I love how you did that yesterday. I love how you talked to that customer. That was so cool. Or I love that idea you brought up in that meeting. I know we didn't go with it, but there was so much merit. And I think it was neat how you phrased it. Whatever it is that I'm pointing out, or I see you're struggling. Can I help you? Right. Or whatever it is. Like, there's a million manifestations of delivering on these human needs in that middle of the hierarchy. So, but when we do that, we create a fascinating thing chemically, right? Things start happening in our bodies. Legitimately, oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, things get released in our bodies. Both our bodies for doing that and thing, theirs. And the receiver's bodies for doing that thing. And everyone around us who witnessed it get the same chemical reaction. And our bodies are wired to mimic and want to replicate and continue those releases of those drugs. So it becomes contagious. So we start to do that. So, I've always said to leaders, like, you want employees to be incredibly empathetic with customers. Are you incredibly empathetic with employees? What does that mean? Well, it means, like, let me ask you a question. What happens when an employee is late 6 times? Well, we have a policy in our HR that says blah, blah, blah. Do you have it? Do you understand why they're late? Is it the same when Neal's late as when NK's late? I mean, maybe, but I mean, we follow. So you're not doing with your employee what you want your employee to do with your customer, or with their teammate, or with their other departments where there are silos, or you're not modeling that same. I love leaders who are like, you can get fierce loyalty as a leadership. I've seen this happen and this is not sustainable, when you fight against the other departments and defend your people at all costs. That's amazing. As an employee, it's like, oh my God, my leader has my back. But as an organization, you are dying.
That's not good, actually.
Yeah. So anyways, emotions and these deeds and this human experience mindset is highly contagious. You can create cultural transformation if you bring it to the work every day, even if the company doesn't have it. You can start to infiltrate it, and it does infiltrate thinking, and it does make leadership start to consider things differently, and it does affect change. I've seen it happen with great leaders, great employees. Right. So you bring it to work, HX framework, sure. HX design, sure. Role modeling, journey mapping with HX theory, hiring for this, but you also bring it to work just by doing it and believing in it every single day. So lots of ways to bring it in.
I think what I loved about this conversation is just think about for a minute before you're doing anything, and just be human with everyone around us, right? Just as simple as that. So
wait. You know what's even scarier? Sorry, I have to say this.
That's
this is
okay.
The negative emotions are also contagious, but they're more contagious. So because of our sort of basic survival wiring of fight, flight, we tend to take on and react to negative emotions more strongly because it's a survival instinct. Anger, fear, we latch onto those. Oh my God, fear, survival, like literally it's genetic. So this is also really important to note in what are we celebrating? Hey, Tanuj got the most sales and Neal got 70% of the sales, but Tanuj is kind of not the best with his coworkers, and he didn't get all of his sales ethically. and
Right.
Neal is loved by all, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's probably the other way around, but
Yeah.
just saying. So what happens when we celebrate, Tanuj? It's we're sending a message that these behavioral values are not as important as that sale.
Right.
And it infiltrates the organization, and negativity spreads, and then all sales drop, right?
Right.
Even if Tanuj is still succeeding. So
Yeah.
you lose. You lose when you don't recognize the right things.
The, one question on this, I think I'll put that as last two questions now. Well, totally different to HX. So people, there are some people who what would you do to make them open up, right? So you try opening up yourself. You try your vulnerabilities, even at the hiring time as well, right? Your challenges, and you'll think that they'll open up to you. And some of the people actually do. Once you try this, when you open up, they open up, right? But what about those people who never open up, Neal? No matter how
Yeah.
much you open up with them, that happens a lot. That's reality, right? So what do you
Yeah.
do with those kind of people? What have you tried? Is there anything that works?
I mean, it's hard to say when we say things like, "Hey, check, we opened up." Like, well, what does that really mean? Like, I have never been in a situation, to be honest with you. I shouldn't say that. At least not in the last few years of my career. Definitely in the beginning, I wasn't even attempting to open people up. I haven't been in a situation in the back few years of my career where I haven't been able to do it. And it's not like it's magic.
Right.
This idea of opening up, it's not just about opening up. Like this idea of vulnerability, and it's immense power. Like if you think about why people are closed, it's a defense mechanism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we often talk about the inner walls that we erect to protect ourselves, to protect our hearts, to protect our esteem, to protect our ego. We put up these walls, these defenses. And it's always like another great example in every movie: two people holding a gun. You put yours down first. Okay, I'm going to put mine down first. Okay, fine, I can put mine down. It's psychologically how it actually works, right? So it's about lowering your walls, so that you are so naked and exposed and vulnerable. I don't just mean you've opened up. I mean, like, you are vulnerable. You are
Mm-hmm.
showing something to this person that makes them feel safe to say, you know what, I can drop this a little bit. I can peek over and I can actually
Right.
show you who I am. And I would say to you, it's not just about opening up. It's about uncovering the right thing to open up about. It's about uncovering the right place to be vulnerable. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not easy. I've had some interviews last 20 minutes and I'm like, you're hired at the end of the interview.
Right.
I also, what I hate leaders that go, we'll let you know. It's like, are you going to waiting along for this other unicorn person to come along? This person is the one. You found them. You should let them know. Like, how cruel. It's like withholding love in a romantic relationship. How cruel. I'm not going to say I love you, even though I know I'm hiring you. This is great. Sometimes you know it in 20 minutes. I've had interviews that I've let last an hour and a half when they were scheduled for 45 minutes because I don't want to stop until I've really explored,
Mm-hmm.
who they are and found the place that I need to be real and vulnerable with them to give them permission to do the same. And, there's been some holdouts that have been really hard. Look, the other thing is information too. Like, depending on the job, if it's that challenging for someone to open up, then there might be development work that they need to work on that you need them to get to before they're ready for this job. I mean, that's just a reality. As a human being, I still want to help them. But as an organization, I need them to be at a certain EQ out of
Right.
the gate. So there's also some, element to that to say, this is also important information. I understand why, and I want to help it, but it's important information anyways.
Right.
But I still say I have never really encountered a situation where, I couldn't get that person to be real or authentic.
Okay.
And it's not easy. and it, you know, it's challenged me to be uncomfortable. It's
Right.
challenged me to, I preach vulnerability, but it's not like I don't have my own dragons that I'm hiding, you know. It pushes me to be as vulnerable as I can in those sessions. It pushes me to expose something that I'm still working through, or ask that person for help. You know,
Okay.
say, like, I'm struggling with this particular thing, and I like, how would you help me if you were in this situation? Like, what an amazing way to be vulnerable, right? I'm not just showing you
That's
my
a great
weakness.
idea.
I'm leaning on you for wisdom. And that gives you permission to really be safe. Like, that's safety right there. So
Yep.
there's lots
Yep.
of ways, and it takes, honestly, it takes years. And I'm
So
still,
much.
I'd like to do it in 20 minutes every time. I don't like that it's an hour and a half sometimes. Like,
Right.
you know, I want to get better at it, but I think there's always
Okay.
a way.
But I think the idea behind what you mentioned, I really love this, the safety part, that asking for the wisdom. And that, now I'm thinking about it, the instances where it helped, and it actually did. What I love about your conversation, even when you disagree with something, Neil, you say it in a way that I loved it, even though when you were disagreeing with it. I think it's like, and I was keep on thinking that in my mind. How does this guy do that? He's disagreeing with something and still making me feel happy. So that is something I really loved, Neil. So that is what I learned about your nature. That this is something that, and
I'll
you
take that
drive
as a
humans.
compliment. I hope. I
It
think that's
is.
a compliment.
Yeah, it is. I think more many people would say this to you. Like, I have this is our second call, so I got this now, that this is who you are, and it's a lovely like thing to have. If, and it can be built. That's what I think.
Let me kind of sort of reflect that back. So, you know, we're such a product of our environment, right? Like, again, like, psychologically, we have you can't help, our bodies can't help but mimic. So if someone around us is very aggressive and is full of conflict, you have to be very, very mindful of that, because it'd be very easy to mimic it. And the discussions that we had in our panel session, and the discussions with you two, it makes it very easy for
Right.
me to do that, because you guys have, both of you have such a natural curiosity, and it's a humble curiosity. You don't come at it with ego. You're not trying to profess and preach a gospel. You're trying to discover and uncover different views and truths, and it makes it easy for the conversation to be that way. So I would reflect the compliment back on you guys. It's always such an easy conversation to have.
I think that's also, so that's one skill that we have developed of listening, and one skill that we would love to learn is how to, like, how to happily disagree with something and still make the other person not feel bad. No, it's really nice, Neil. And
That's the
what actually happens is not about
I
just,
was
yeah. Go ahead, NK.
yeah, no, complete it.
Okay, so not just about feeling bad, but thinking about in a way that, okay, I never thought about it this way. You make
I
it so
pre
comfortable for me to think that.
I'm all a blush. I like the way you phrase it better than someone. So I've been told that before, but one person once phrased it as, "You have this way of saying no to me every time, that I never feel bad about." I'm like, wait a second. Are you saying I always say no to you? Like, what do you mean? Like, are you saying I never agree with you? Like, wait a second. There's an issue if that's true. That's not always a good thing here. So I appreciate the way you phrased it a lot better than the way it's been phrased in the past.
Yes, NK, you wanted to say something.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I think like that shows the experience of Neil's coming from the contact center, right? He has been working with so many customers and leading those, thousands and thousands of contact center employees, and managing those conversations is a great skill.
Yep.
I think I would say another way, so that Neil, you have been a great person to manage conversations pretty well. So a lot to learn from you.
Yeah.
I feel the same way, and I think I have to stop you guys. No more, no more. I appreciate it. It's been honestly, these conversations, I can talk about them forever. I love your guys' views. I love your nature. It's been great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it was lovely having you, Neil. I think I learned a lot, appreciating little things, psychologically, how understanding humans, and the firing question to ourselves, that was lovely. And how doing this all
Yeah.
human stuff can bring the ROI on its own. I don't have to think about ROI now.
Yeah.
It will bring on its own. Yeah. So I loved having you here, and I'm sure NK did too.